Hello everyone, Anna here. Today I'm going to take you on my trip to the East Coast with me where I try travel sketching for the first time using watercolor. I did a couple sketches while I was on vacation and I'm going to show you a couple that I did when I got home. While I also share my thoughts on travel sketching itself and my personal experience with it. Let's get started. In setting up my travel art kit, I got this little half pan watercolor palette. I wanted white trays for mixing and I didn't need a whole lot of pans, but I knew which paint I wanted to take. So I put my Winsor Newton professional watercolor paint in this palette. This one I'm opening came with the set, but I found it a little bit big and I didn't like that it didn't have pans, so I got the extra palette. I also wanted to add some other colors to it, so I pulled out some of my older paint and I also added 3 new colors that I just got. My brand new colors are Chromium Green Oxide, Quinacridone Gold, and Quinacridone Rose, all by Daniel Smith. And I also added Daniel Smith's Permanent Violet and Winsor Newton's Permanent Alizaran Crimson and Neutral Tint, which I already had, on top of my Winsor Newton professional set. There will be a list of all of the colors and their brands down in the description below. Pro tip, old nutcrackers are super handy for opening stubborn paint tubes. This one belonged to my grandmother and it is very handy. I filled up this palette with my colors and I just used a toothpick to settle the paint in a little bit. I tried tapping, but I didn't find it very effective, and maybe I just don't have enough patience for that. The half pans themselves are not held in place by magnets. They are held in place by these wire supports these metal supports on the sides. They have to be quite tight to keep the pans in, but after I pushed them into place a little bit, I was able to turn the pans upside down and they stayed in place perfectly fine. I cut a piece of watercolor paper to the size of the palette and made a little key for my colors so that I wouldn't forget what was what in case I didn't use this for a while and came back to it and wanted to know exactly what the colors were and which brands they are, especially in the case of wanting to change them out or refill them in the future. This little travel palette might be my favorite one that I've gotten so far. It's big enough that it fits quite a lot of color variety in the half pans and has a good amount of mixing space, but it's also small enough that it's compact for travel and doesn't take up a lot of room. Lifting the tray of colors out was a little tricky the first couple times I did it. The half pans feel like they're gonna fall, but like I said, once I adjusted the metal supports, they stayed in place really nicely. I was able to turn it upside down and they were fine. And yeah, it came together really well and this little paper fit inside perfectly. And yeah, it's a super versatile little palette. I recommend it. Link below in the description. None of this is sponsored, by the way. I am one of those people who has a great tendency to overpack, and I'm really trying not to do that. I fit everything into this little pencil case. I'm going to show you everything I'm taking. I got everything to fit in this pretty small case, and I took this little water cup from my other travel palette, and it fit perfectly on this one too, which was awesome. And I was able to slide it onto the case for extra compact travel, which, how neat is that? I also took a ruler, some watercolor pencils, ink pens, erasers, and some drawing pencils of different variety, 2 watercolor sketchbooks, and my regular sketchbook. I haven't been on a plane in 10 years. I was nervous that they'd be upset about my watercolors, but they weren't. I had no mention of it. Immediately in Virginia, I was struck by how green it was and how many trees there were and how big they were. I am gonna miss them. It was so beautiful. We visited historic Williamsburg, and it was so pretty. A lot of original buildings. It was fantastic. Saw some ponies. Wish I'd seen more ponies. This garden was gorgeous. A lot of these old buildings, the light on them, I just kept thinking, wow, these will make lovely watercolors. I'll never get to all of them, but I'm gonna try to get to some of them. It was so green, everybody. Utah is not this green. We then went to historic Jamestown. I felt a little bit like I'd stepped into the movie Pocahontas at first, which wasn't a bad thing. This was really cool. This is all replica. Some of Williamsburg was original buildings. This is all replica of Jamestown and Native American settlement. This was some ships. I should remember the names of them, but I don't. But I got really excited because I love sailing ships. And I got to play on this one a little bit. Thanks to Patrice for taking that picture. Also, again, ginormous trees. So gorgeous. After Williamsburg, we headed to North Carolina, and the huge trees gave way to sandy, scrubby grass and bushes and some marshland, and we were right on Pamlico Sound, and the sunsets were absolutely spectacular. It was very windy. There were a lot of birds. I loved watching them and listening to them. There were also a lot of windsurfers, and sometimes they did cool stuff. I loved the marsh sounds too. This is the kind of stuff you don't get in Utah. We also went to the beach on the opposite side, about a 10-minute walk. So we were between Pamlico Sound and the ocean. Again, I loved watching the birds. The waves here were huge. It's hard to show you in a video the scale, but once you got out there and were playing in them, it was pretty wild. Very fun though. It was one of the funnest beach days I have ever had. And it was gorgeous. So I finally got some painting done. I was here for my brother's wedding, by the way, and we had family and friends out here. There were nearly 40 people. So this trip was kind of chaotic, and I didn't get as much time to paint as I would have liked. But yeah, I finally sat down to paint a view of the Sound from our balcony, and I immediately noticed that the paper in this sketchbook was just kind of frustrating. So this is a 100% cotton paper, which I think I've used before, but not much. And this sketchbook was only $10 on Amazon. Might be a little bit more than that now. But I was quite frustrated with it at first. I had never had water just sit on top of the paper the way that this did, and it dried extremely slow even for a humid environment. Also, I should say, I was feeling quite rushed. I had a hard time being able to relax and settle into what I was doing, which meant that I had a hard time thinking about my values, my colors, and I definitely was too impatient to let the paper dry, so I got a lot of weird blooms that aren't quite what I was looking for. I think some of them are really pretty, but some of them just definitely made the page look muddy and messy. I then tried the next day to do this view of trees, and this was definitely eye-opening in regard to me just having trouble, I think with like most artists who haven't had practice mixing greens. I had a really hard time not turning this into a muddy mess. It is a muddy mess. Like, this painting is not good. It's a bad painting. I mixed some pretty greens, but the values are all way too similar, and I, again, was too impatient to let my paper dry, and So I just ended up with a bunch of greens that are pretty close to the same value range and a page of green blobs that vaguely resemble trees. That isn't to say that it wasn't a good experience. I feel like the things that I was able to observe about my process were definitely things that were good to observe and to keep in mind. I don't know that this kind of artwork is really for me, in the sense of being somewhere unfamiliar and trying to hurry because I have other things to do. I was tending my niece and nephew on and off. I was, there were other people around. I was talking to my sister-in-law while I was doing half of this painting. And so, yeah, it was just a lot of chaos. And so I didn't really have the brain power to focus on what I was doing and to really give it the attention that it deserved. I am here painting one of my sunsets from the night before, and I'd like to try this one again. I think the colors are spectacular, and I would like to see if I can get them more accurate and get my values more accurate. And again, I'm having a really hard time with this paper and the way that the water just sits on it. Especially when I'm trying to paint quickly, I found this extremely frustrating. I do like the way that the paper repels water in the sense of getting blooms and texture. I think that the paper's coating is a little bit too much, so it's repelling too much water as opposed to absorbing a decent amount of it. I don't hate it, but it definitely requires some patience. Shaping up to be spectacular. We left Pamlico on a very rainy morning, and I was glad I got to see it in the rain. I thought it was quite pretty. And we headed off back to Virginia. I loved Virginia Beach, and I want to go back. I thought this was just so beautiful, and I loved watching all the boats. There were so many boats, and I got to see this amazing Neptune sculpture statue. We also went to see the USS Wisconsin, where it's permanently docked at a museum, and we got to go inside. This is a battleship, and I thought this was pretty cool. We went on a boat tour and saw a lot of the ships. Those are windmill parts that they're taking out to sea. Thought that was pretty cool. And a aircraft carrier. That was sweet. Pretty crazy to see how big they are. And then back to the beach. I went on a sunset walk with my dad and my stepmom and my brother, sister-in-law, and my brand new little nephew. And I loved seeing the light from the sky and the sunset reflecting in the sand. I am gonna miss the ocean. On the flight home, I got to see part of Lake Michigan and Chicago from the air. And let me tell you, that's the biggest city I've ever seen, and it was spectacular even from the air. Absolutely incredible. Hopefully someday I'll get to see it up close. So I'm actually home now. I was only able to get 3 sketches in while I was on vacation. It was really crazy. There were so many people there, and we were very busy. So it's not really a surprise. I think that if I were to go on vacation with the sole purpose of painting and drawing, it would probably be a better situation for me. But I was still taking pictures and video with a mind to paint things from my vacation, and I think that counts. So I'm home now, and I'm gonna paint a couple things from my photos. I'm also glad that I did try painting at all, and I learned some things, and I think that's always productive. So I'll take that as well. And started to get to know my materials, which also helps. I decided when I got home that I was going to try a watercolor sketch in this little book that I also took that I didn't end up using. I didn't end up using a lot of my supplies. I just didn't have time. But I was curious to see how this one would behave with the water, especially given that this one's only 25% cotton. Also, pretty cheap little book that I got off Amazon. I've had this one for quite a while. And yeah, of course, the paper was drying faster now that I was home because Utah is extremely dry. And yet I still just decided that I didn't want to let the first layer dry of the water. So yeah, I really need to learn patience. Who can relate? Who can relate to feeling impatient with their artwork? I think that a huge issue with seeing speed paints and sped up footage all the time and seeing a 30-hour painting condensed to 90 seconds, it kind of creates this subconscious thinking that maybe you have to do everything really fast. And I definitely obviously learned from this experience that that's something that I need to be aware of, that, you know, reminding myself consciously that that's not how it works. And slow down. Let the layers dry where you need them to. Be conscious of where you want wet and where you need it to be dry. All that being said, I found that I was able to focus more and that I was able to be more aware of the colors that I was mixing and also be more aware of my values. I don't know if I mentioned this, but I also put white gouache in my palette. It's a Winsor & Newton, I believe, designer gouache. So I'm using white in some little spots, like getting these sandy spots in and painting the dock here, the pier. I was using white gouache mixed with watercolor in some cases to give it a little bit of a tint or a tone. But yeah, pretty handy to have in a watercolor palette. It's not something I probably would have thought of myself for a long time, but I've seen a lot of other artists do it, and I'm glad that I took a page out of their book. Okay, so this is my first attempt at the same view, only this is closer up. I painted this one on the 4th floor of the house we were staying in after taking a picture. It was so windy the whole time, so I didn't actually paint outside. So windy. But this is the second attempt. I like this one a lot better. Some things to note is that while I was painting here at home, I was able to just kind of focus and slow down and let layers dry between instead of letting everything run together. There's still some of that. Also, I feel like as compared to this one, these colors and values are a better choice. Like, I did better with that. But let's keep painting. This was me going back to the bigger sketchbook again and noting how the water just sits on top of the paper, even in this super dry environment. I guess really it's just a matter of getting to know my materials, which is something that I'm doing in all regards of every medium that I use. And, you know, this book and all this paint is quite new to me. So weird sitting on top of the paper, maybe that's normal, but also it's drying slowly, which is actually what I want. So this is an adventure. This final sketch that I did, I really was determined to take my time, and I still wanted to keep it a sketch, like not something that I spent hours and hours on, but something that I put a little bit more thought and just awareness into. So I actually did a drawing, which I forgot to do with the last one, and then once again found that I was frustrated with the water not absorbing into the paper. But I was happy that it was not drying immediately, which is a problem that I often have when doing watercolor or gouache in Utah's dry air. I was able to get these really nice gradients into the sky where I had the colors blend into each other exactly how I wanted them to. So that was nice. After that dried, I decided to try and wet the paper first and then let it dry for the ocean part, just to see if that made a difference with the absorption. And I do think it did a little bit, so that was nice. I just think that whatever kind of coating that they've put on the paper, it's just a little bit too much. So keep that in mind if you decide you want to buy this book. I'll have a link in the description of everything, including this book. Despite that frustration, I like the paper. I find it to... I really like the tooth. I like the texture that it has in the paintings. I like the way that dry brush looks on it. I like the blooms that this paper produces. So the one frustration I have is that the protective coating is a little too much and the paper is very water resistant. A little too much. And I need to experiment more, but going over it with water a couple times and letting it dry seems to help a little bit. So just keep that in mind. This view that I'm painting is Virginia Beach at sunset, which I was kind of obsessed with. Part of me loves how it looks right here, even though it's a very abstract painting right here. I just love the blooms. I think they're so pretty. And I wouldn't have been super sad if I just left it how it was there. And then right here, I unfortunately lost some of the footage of me starting to add details, which I did decide to do. Despite the beautiful blooms, I did want to push this painting a bit further and get it to a more finished point. I'm mostly using, for the ocean water and the lower corner of the sand, the dark color, I'm mostly using Payne's Gray and Neutral Tint. And I forgot exactly which yellow that is. I think it's Windsor yellow. Don't quote me on that though. And I think the pink is actually Alizaran Crimson, I think. I'm not 100% satisfied with how this looks. I feel like I got my values and stuff really close, but it's the kind of thing where later I feel like if I'd been able to use like masking fluid and keep parts of the water white where they were white and foaming instead of using gouache, I think it would have looked better, because no matter how much I layered the white gouache, it never had the bright whiteness of the paper. And I think that's just the nature of it's re-wetting the paint beneath it and picking up a tiny bit of the pigment. So, and it's transparent, so, you know. Maybe if I layered it more, but this was a sketch and no thanks. Adding some bubbles here in the sand. Overall, I'm really pleased with this painting. I think it's quite pretty, and it did capture the effect that I wanted it to have. Overall, my first experience with this kind of sketching has been positive. I've learned a lot, and it's something I definitely will do more of in the future, although it's probably not going to be my main focus ever. But I do think it's a really good practice to have, and a really good way to learn, and yeah, I recommend it. Thanks for joining me on my little vacation and doing some painting. I really, really, really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and maybe leave me a comment. Tell me if you've done travel sketching before and what kind, like what materials do you use? I would love to know. And yeah, please subscribe if you like my stuff, and I'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.